Now, just a little warning before we begin that there will be some general spoilers for the Book of Boba Fett in this video up through the 4th episode. So if you're not caught up and you don't want anything at all possibly ruined, you may want to skip this video for now. Okay, so as I've talked about before, and I even did a poll covering this, but there are certainly a lot of varying opinions when it comes to the Book of Boba Fett thus far. A lot of disagreement about just how good or maybe not so good it's been, with thus far being the key words here, since yes, we do have 3 episodes left to go, and anything can still happen. They could certainly blow our minds here in these next 3 weeks and leave us all, or almost all fans, feeling like this was an incredible series, even those who are full of doubt right now. And as someone who currently puts himself in the good but not great category for the series, who's always really liked the character of Boba Fett but never really been what you'd call a super fan of him, I can understand if you're maybe someone who's been loving every minute of this, as I can understand if you're someone who's been disappointed or thinks that it hasn't lived up to all the expectations, that this isn't the Boba Fett or the Boba Fett series you were hoping for going into it, or even hoping for getting someday, somehow, after becoming a fan of the character at some point in the past 40 plus years that he's been around, be that way back in the day when he first showed up in the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special in 1978, or when his likeness appeared on Kenner card backs shortly thereafter, advertising a rocket-firing action figure that you could get by sending in 4 proofs of purchases from other figures. All the way up to then his brief appearance as a kid in the prequel trilogy and in Clone Wars, and of course the deep exploration of the character we got in the expanded universe, where he eventually becomes ruler of Mandalore. There is absolutely a lot of history to this character, and a lot of cause to expect big things from this series and from the character himself in it. Yet despite that history, I do see some making the argument that Boba Fett has never been anything more than a legend created in the minds of fans who love him for no real reason other than he looks cool, who think that he's an amazing or famous bounty hunter for no real reason, that we shouldn't be expecting too much from him in this series. And well, if you're someone who thinks that there is nothing special to Boba Fett, that he is a legend in the mind and not in reality or in the reality of the Star Wars galaxy, well, I'm here to tell you, you couldn't be any more wrong. And though there's plenty of things we could look at in the history of the character itself to make our case, it really only takes one beautifully crafted scene to do it for us. That being the one from The Empire Strikes Back when he's first introduced in the movies, where he, along with 5 other bounty hunters, are selected by Darth Vader to track down the Millennium Falcon and Luke's friends, who Vader needs as part of his plan to lure in Luke Skywalker, who he's been ordered by his Sith Master Palpatine to bring before him. Clearly, only the best of the best will do for such a task, better than even anything the Empire itself has at its disposal, which is basically argued against by Admiral Piet when he comments that,
"Bounty hunters? We don't need that scum."
Yes, sir.
But Vader obviously disagrees with that assessment, and while he's telling these elite 6 bounty hunters what he needs from them, he stops and utters the line that would both create and cement the legacy of Boba Fett all at once.
But I want them alive. No disintegrations.
Which, though, could mean many things specifically that we can have fun guessing at. In general, it tells us that Boba Fett and his work is well known to Darth Vader of all people in the galaxy, and that, thanks to the vehemence behind the way he even says this line, for all we know, Boba Fett has worked for Vader before, and disintegrated someone Vader wanted brought to him alive. Which you'd think would mean death for Boba Fett, that he would have killed him for such a thing, and we've seen Vader kill his own subordinates for potentially smaller failures for all we know. But here he is going back to Boba Fett again, trusting him to get this very important job done, and done the right way this time, because he knows he can and will, and then ultimately does do the job. It all shows a level of respect for Boba Fett out of Vader, which only gets reinforced later on when Vader promises to compensate Boba Fett should anything go wrong with putting Han in carbonite, thus not allowing Boba Fett to take Han back to Jabba to claim the price on his head. And he does this, he promises this to Fett, all the while constantly altering the deal with Lando, showing that Vader has no real issue with breaking promises or deals when it suits him, but that he won't do that to Boba Fett. Him he makes assurances to, because the last thing that Vader wants or seems to want to do here is potentially lose Boba Fett as an asset, as someone he can go to for the most important of tasks. It tells us that Boba Fett is the best of the best in Vader's mind, and that he should be in ours as well. And so, keeping that in mind, what I think a lot of Boba Fett fans were hoping for out of the Book of Boba Fett is to see more of those reasons why Darth Vader thought so highly of him, why he respected him, why he thought he was the best in the galaxy, which isn't to say a lot of those fans aren't still enjoying the story to some degree or what the Book of Boba Fett is, and maybe to a large degree, or that there isn't still a really good chance that we'll see some more out of Fett in these final episodes. I'm almost certain we will, or that we haven't seen some really cool stuff out of him already. But, and I talked about this briefly in my review of episode 4, I think one of the big areas the show is kind of lacking in is finally showing us some of who and what Boba Fett was before falling into the pit and before the transformation we see in progress as the series goes on. Yes, we have what Vader said in The Empire Strikes Back, and it does do a masterful job of telling us that he is the best, at least according to Vader, which does or should say a lot. But I think a lot of fans wanted to see, and have been waiting to see, at least a little bit of that, of what made him the greatest in the eyes of Vader. Now sure, they're okay with him changing. He changes quite a bit in the EU after all from what he once was. But they still wanted to see what he's changing from, instead of just having it implied that he was once this more cold-hearted or cutthroat bounty hunter. Not to mention, if you're new to Star Wars, if you're maybe a younger fan or someone just getting into the franchise, the name Boba Fett alone doesn't mean all that much. And so to play a bit of armchair quarterback here, or armchair writer and director I suppose, and to do it for fun, I'm not here to anger you if you love the series as is. I do enjoy to do what ifs, that's one of my things here. And so to play the what if game, I do wonder what if they'd done things just a bit differently with the series, and if maybe they could have fixed some of the issues I'm seeing some fans have with the series by having everything we've seen so far be a linear story instead, starting with him getting out of the pit and encountering the Tuskens, and then going on to everything we see in the more present tense with the Pikes. And then you can still have flashbacks, no back to tank required, and go back to the time shortly before, say, The Empire Strikes Back, when Boba Fett took a job for Darth Vader, but not a job he did alone, and instead one he did with Fennec Shand and maybe a few other bounty hunters, a job where Vader wants him and this crew of his to perhaps capture and extract a member or informant of the Black Sun Syndicate who has some sort of valuable information that Vader wants or needs, and he wants this guy alive. And at first, Boba Fett doesn't want to take the job because he always works alone, but of course Vader makes a very compelling offer, one he can't refuse, and eventually he takes the job. And while he's on this mission, at first he is of course kind of standoffish and doesn't care and doesn't want to do things anyway but his own way. But then, slowly but surely, he starts to come around, and just a bit, he begins to like his teammates, especially Fennec Shand. However, in the end, one or two of his teammates perhaps were working for a different syndicate, let's make it the Pikes to align with the rest of the story in the Book of Boba Fett. And so then there's this big double-cross moment, which results in a shootout that gets the whole team outside of him and Fennec Shand. It gets them all killed. And then it turns out the informant they were sent to capture didn't even know anything important, and so Boba Fett disintegrates him, and later on he tells Vader he didn't know anything, and Vader, begrudgingly, has to accept that and allows Boba Fett to live. This then does a few different things, including explain the no disintegrations line, which no, honestly doesn't need explaining, it's fine as is, but I think it'd be fun to play with it and to do something with it. It then also does a lot for the other part of the story, for the current timeline in the Book of Boba Fett, the post-escape from the pit, shall we call it, one of which being why Boba is tired of working for people who just end up getting his kind or fellow bounty hunters killed, and killed for nothing. It also gives Fennec Shand not only some much-needed backstory, but history with Boba Fett. Perhaps he even saves her back in during this mission, or maybe she was the double crosser and he ends up understanding why she did it, that it was all for the money, it was all part of the job. But then they both kind of have this moment where they lament the fact that they are working for others and that their kind end up getting killed, again, for nothing. This then already kind of puts her on board, or makes her on board with his ideas later on to operate with respect and to not get their kind needlessly killed. We can then also change the current part of the story just a bit to have it where, after Boba Fett realizes he can't get Slave One back on his own, he sends a message to Fennec Shand to come and help him, that it's time to do what they once talked about all those years ago. And then she, even though she has a bounty on her head, comes and goes into the desert looking for him, looking to meet him there at some designated point, which explains why Boba would eventually find her and then save her life and all of that. I think this makes more sense than her, for whatever reason, just picking Tatooine to be where she decides to hide or lay low, that she thought it was a good idea to just go out in the desert and hide instead of, I don't know, being like Din Djarin in The Mandalorian, who, when he had to lay low for a while, he picked a lush green world to hide out on, not a desert. Anyway, these are just some fun, basic thoughts on what I do differently with the series, with the key word there being fun. If you're loving it as is, that is fantastic. And maybe I'll elaborate more on my ideas in a future video if people want to see something like that. Either way, as I said before, I am enjoying the series. I am. I just wish there was a bit more to it. And I think there easily could have and probably should have been. Because, yes, Boba Fett is meant to be the best bounty hunter in the galaxy at this time. And if you disagree, you can feel free to take it up with Darth Vader. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you've thought of the Book of Boba Fett so far. Tell me what you think about that scene. Does it really build the character as much as I feel it does? Or maybe you don't feel that way. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.